Lundy, Mr. Kishan, the UNDP resident representative for Jamaica, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, and Turks and Caicos. Acting Director General for Jamaica's Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, Rita Thompson and his senior management team, Alex Storr, Chairman for the Disaster Reconstruction Authority in the Bahamas, Aaron Sargent, Acting Managing Director for Disaster Reconstruction Authority and his senior management team, Daniel Coleman, Director of Hazard Management in the Cayman Islands, Brian Bean, Policy, Planning and Program Manager with the Ministry of Tourism, Environment, Fisheries and Marine Affairs, Culture and Heritage, Agriculture and Religious Affairs in the Turks and Caicos Islands, representatives and ministries, departments, agencies, academic institutions on location here at the UNDP and online, members of the media, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, partners and colleagues, good morning. Welcome to the United Nations Development Programme's Resilient Series Part 2, the Disaster Risk Resilient Knowledge Exchange. Today, we are all gathered here to tap into the rich storehouse of experience and expertise from the Caribbean, particularly our small island states, who are currently on the front lines of climate change, particularly in the hurricane-prone corridor of the Caribbean. My name is Janelle Tomlinson Evans, and I join you live from the UNDP office in Kingston, Jamaica. I am thrilled to have our attendees and partners with us, including those from the Office of the Prime Minister in Abaco, as well as those joining us via Zoom and on the UNDP and GIS's YouTube and Facebook pages. To those of us online, we invite you to like and share this live stream, comment, and most importantly, ask questions during our Q&A segments. We ask that you also include your name with your comments and questions so that we are able to acknowledge you during the interventions. And so at this moment, I would like to give special acknowledgement to our audience in Abaco in the Bahamas, many of whom have endured the devastating impact of Hurricane Dorian in 2019. Your resilience and strength serve as an inspiration to us all, and we're particularly happy to have you share and to join with us today. And so to acknowledge the team in the Bahamas, we would like to ask them kindly to wave as we welcome them. Similarly, I'd also like to invite the team here in Jamaica to return the wave and to officially also welcome our Bahamian colleagues. So let's wave to them. Today is Friday, May 17th, and we're 2 weeks away from the start of the hurricane season. I know for many of us that is a very threatening thought, but as we approach this critical time, it is important that we highlight that crisis resilience has been and remains a core part of UNDP's mandate. It is a cornerstone of the ongoing efforts under the UNDP's multi-country program 2022 to 2026, and further aims to enhance the capacity of communities to withstand and recover from disasters. Today's Knowledge Exchange event is being convened under the Abaco Community Shelter Project in Abaco, the Bahamas. This initiative, financed by the Government of India and implemented by the UNDP in partnership with the Government of the Bahamas, is testament to the ongoing commitment to building resilient communities. Through this event, we hope to share invaluable insights and best practices, highlighting the importance of collaboration and knowledge exchange, particularly among our partners. Today's agenda will feature high-level opening remarks from our country representatives, followed by 2 insightful panels. The first round of discussions will seek to highlight the existing governance mechanisms in place to address both disaster preparedness and recovery, and the second will cater to hurricane-resilient buildings and houses in particular, initiatives being implemented on the ground by different entities in an effort to build resilience, adaptive capacity, and ultimately support communities to bounce forward. Zoom guests are invited to raise their hands where the committee mics will be enabled, and panelist videos and mics will be enabled to facilitate their full participation. We do hope that upon conclusion of today's event, we would have gained a deeper understanding of the activities being undertaken at both the national and local levels to support resilience building and disaster risk reduction. By sharing these experiences and insights, we also aim to highlight the collaborative work being done to enhance preparedness and to also strengthen community resilience. The goal is therefore for us to leave with a clearer picture of strategies and actions that are making a tangible difference in reducing risks and building resilient futures for our communities. Having provided this context, I would therefore like to highlight and to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Kishan, the UNDP resident representative for Jamaica, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, and Turks and Caicos Islands. And so to provide a little bit of background about Mr. Kade, he has served UNDP for the past 25 years in Asia and the Pacific, as well as in the Middle East and North Africa. This has included 15 years with the UNDP country offices in China, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia, advancing UNDP's mandate to accelerate action on economic diversification and transformation. Climate change, ecosystem conservation, women's empowerment, disaster risk reduction, and human security are also among Kishan's strong suits. In recent years, Kishan has served in UNDP's regional offices for the MENA region based in Egypt and Jordan, overseeing the UN's largest program of assistance in the region to address climate emergency and the trends of multi-dimensional crises. Prior to joining the UN, Kishan has worked with government and community organizations in his home countries of Canada and India on issues of poverty reduction, ecological resilience, and community empowerment. He holds a Juris Doctorate from Vermont Law, specializing in constitutional, international, and environmental law, a Master of Science in Resource Management, specializing in water and land governance, and a Bachelor of Science from McGill University in Agriculture, specializing in biodiversity and ecological change. Mr. Kade, welcome, sir, and please, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you for that very extensive and gracious introduction. And welcome, everybody. Good morning again, and welcome, everybody, to the UNDP Multi-Country Office here in Jamaica. It's a pleasure to have everybody here with us today for this very important edition, second edition of the Resilience Series. Good morning in particular, and welcome Honorable Minister Lundy, His Worship Mayor of Kingston, Swabi, Director General Thompson from ODPEM here in Jamaica, Chairman Storr from DRA in Bahamas, Managing Director Sargent, likewise from DRA Bahamas, and our colleagues from the territories, Daniel Coleman, Director of Hazard Management Cayman Islands, as well as Brian Bean with the Ministry of Tourism and Environment in Turks and Caicos Islands, representative ministries and other partners that are here with us today, members of the media, distinguished colleagues. It's a pleasure. This is really a timely juncture to reflect our journey to resilience, starting with the policy and governance arrangements that future-proof our lives in this crisis-prone region. Also to the need for community-level empowerment, resilient livelihoods, buildings, and infrastructure. As was noted earlier, in exactly 15 days, the Caribbean will mark the start of the 2024 hurricane season. Already, weather analysts are predicting the upcoming season is likely to be one of the most active on record, with 25 named storms and 12 hurricanes expected to pass through in this upcoming hurricane season. As we know from last year, 2023 was already the hottest year on record globally since records began in the 1800s. And in fact, according to many studies, it was the warmest year in the last 2,000 years. So it's no longer the hottest, most intense year over the last decade. We're going into now millennia. The impacts are already being seen, of course, particularly for the most vulnerable and poor communities around the world. Disaster displacement is now at levels much larger than conflict-induced displacements globally. And that's been the case over the last decade. And that's expected to continue, with hundreds of millions of people expected to be displaced by climate-induced disasters in the coming decades. This is particularly relevant for the Caribbean, of course, already 7 times more likely to be hit by natural disasters and sustain damage to GDP 6 times higher than other larger economies. This is expected to get worse, of course, in coming years with more frequent and severe climate-induced disasters, unless, of course, urgent action is taken. To this end, UNDP has partnered with countries around the world over the past decades to manage risk and build resilience. Today, UNDP stands as the UN's largest implementer of grant assistance for climate change and the environment, with over $4 billion of US dollars of programming ongoing in over 140 countries and territories for climate change and the environment today. Today, we stand in solidarity with our country partners, local officials, and communities across the Caribbean to enhance policies and institutions that can manage increased levels of complexity, put in place risk-informed development policies and plans. To scale up local results, UNDP also supports innovation in technology through scaled-up early warning systems and digitization, as well as innovation in finance through design of green bonds, climate risk insurance, and other instruments. The third pillar of our program on climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction is on community empowerment, building local resilience through preparedness and community-based infrastructure, early recovery capacities and systems. So today's Resilience series, as was mentioned, is a coming together of expert minds, and it reflects UNDP's firm belief that solutions to these challenges faced by the region and the world are to be unearthed within small island developing states who are on the front lines of climate change. A central topic, of course, for the upcoming SIDS conference taking place in a couple of weeks, where, of course, UNDP and the rest of the UN system will be present, convening strategic dialogues exactly on this matter. The commendable work done by the Bahamas, Jamaica, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bermuda, and Cayman Islands, which have all faced devastating hurricanes, deserves to be highlighted, analyzed, shared, and taken action on as a follow-up to the SIDS conference and the new action plan to emerge. UNDP is committed to scaling up our programming on climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and early recovery in our partner countries and territories in the Caribbean to prevent, mitigate, and prepare for disasters. A key focus here is on the construction of model hurricane resilient community shelters, of course, in Abaco, and that's a big focus of our gathering today and our discussions to come. As was mentioned, with funding from the Government of India through the UN-India Partnership Fund, it's a prime example of resilient infrastructure that can help communities recover and save lives and investments going forward. UNDP, from financing from India and the leadership of the Government of the Bahamas, is building the center to code to be able to withstand even more frequent and severe storms to come in the future. I'm looking forward to the progress reports and the information on its resilient features in that work during this live session. So to wrap up, globally, UNDP offers a number of assessment tools and methodologies that are being put in place through our disaster risk reduction program across the Caribbean, including as we'll hear in the Bahamas. This includes, as was mentioned, housing and building damage assessment tools, which we'll learn about, to scope resilient construction and build back better policies. Our partner nations have also access to our global knowledge network in UNDP, with thousands of staff across the world to help develop climate resilient policies, disaster risk reduction and recovery skill sets to support those national and local resilience agendas. Under our recent country programming, UNDP has been proud to have supported strengthening of policy frameworks on these issues for a more disaster resilient future, particularly in Turks and Caicos Islands and the Bahamas, following the 2 Category 5 hurricanes, as was mentioned earlier in recent years. This included support for MSMEs to build back better, to have resilient businesses through training, microgrants to local communities and SMEs, as well as support for emergency cash for work programs to clean up debris and recover livelihoods. We're particularly proud of the bold policy environment spearheaded by the Turks and Caicos Islands and the Bahamas, with UNDP support and collaboration for crisis prevention and response. To wrap up, UNDP is soon marking our 50th anniversary of our presence and programming in the countries in focus today. And we pledge to deepen our support for resilience interventions that shore up national capacities to mitigate climate shocks. So again, I thank you all for joining us today. I thank you all for joining us today, and we wish you a successful dialogue. And we stand with you in follow-up to the dialogue to scale up action for new capacities to deal with these challenges going forward. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kishan, for sharing these opening remarks, and particularly for your intervention. You spoke to the importance of community resilience building, particularly as we think about Caribbean countries on the front lines of not only disaster risk related issues, but also this issue of climate change. And I think something that resonated as you spoke was the fact that we have 25 named storms that we are anticipating for this hurricane season. And you know, it just highlights how timely today's conversation is as we seek to not only speak about what has been done, but what we will continue to do as we seek to advance, you know, action for preparedness and ensuring that we're able to recover when these disasters do strike. The issue of climate-induced displacement is something that we have often spoken about, and then the issue of migration in response to, you know, a lot of these different issues is something that we have to contend with as well as countries in the region. And I'm happy to note the commitment of the UNDP as we seek to work on issues around climate change and the environment, particularly around intervention, innovation, and the provision of support around fiscal readiness. And so we laud the team, we laud your efforts in being able to support not only Jamaica, but the other countries in the territory to be able to prepare, you know, for these pending disasters, as we also recognize the different faces in the room and the different persons who are supporting these efforts. We recognize that collaboration is key in this fight for improved resilience. And so when we think about improving adaptive capacities, including readiness, we recognize that, you know, it's not a single institutional effort, it's all of us working together to advance that action. And so thank you again for providing these insights on behalf of the UNDP, and we do look forward, you know, to the continued work that will happen through the different engagements and projects. So thank you so much, sir. So having now heard from Mr. Kode, I would like to introduce and welcome our next speaker and representative from the Bahamas in the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, Honorable Leon Lundy, who is joining us live from Abaco. And to say a little bit about the Honorable Minister, the Honorable Leon Lundy is a Member of Parliament from Mangrove Key, Central and South Andros, and Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister. His professional journey began in the hospitality industry, where he ascended rapidly through the ranks to become the financial controller of the Holiday Inn Resort at just a very young age of 19 years old. Mr. Lundy's commitment to public service and community development has led him to establish the Lundy Foundation, where he has served as the CEO. Guided by the principles imparted by his educator and parents, he has built a foundation for promoting knowledge and facilitating personal and community growth. On a personal front, he's a devoted husband to Tamara Lundy and a proud father of 4 children. His family values are firmly grounded in belief in hard work, resilience, and of course, the pursuit of excellence. He's a husband, father, son, brother, entrepreneur, and most importantly, a visionary. Let us all welcome Mr. Lundy as he provides and showcases his highlights for today. Mr. Lundy, you have the floor.
Thank you. And standing on the protocol already established, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. I'm actually in the beautiful island of Andros right now, and I extend a warm welcome to each of you to the Disaster Risk Resilience Knowledge Exchange, a vital component of the United Nations Development Program's Resilience Series, Lessons and Best Practices for a Climate Resilient Future. Today marks a significant gathering where our shared determination converges to our strength of our resilience against the escalating perils posed by natural disasters, notably hurricanes, which have left an indelible mark on our beloved Bahamas. As the minister entrusted with the oversight of disaster risk management, I am acutely cognizant of the urgent imperative to fortify our defense against such adversities. Our theme today, best practices and lessons learned in disaster risk resilience, underscores the pivotal role of governance and the imperative to foster hurricane-resilient infrastructures. It exemplifies our unwavering commitment to shield our communities and vital infrastructural assets. The Bahamas has made commendable progress in disaster risk management in recent years, attesting to our profound recognition of the paramount importance of readiness and resilience in confronting national calamities. A watershed moment occurred on April the 15th, 2024, when we enacted the Disaster Risk Management Act 2022. This landmark legislation heralds a comprehensive and cohesive framework for disaster risk management, geared towards mitigating the socio-economic and environmental ramifications of disasters, including those exacerbated by the specter of climate change. The scope of the Disaster Risk Management Act 2022 is both expansive and ambitious. It encompasses the formulation and implementation of the National Disaster Risk Management Plan and the National Disaster Emergency Plan, emblematic of our holistic approach to disaster risk management. These blueprints encompass risk assessment, disaster risk mitigation, preparedness measures, financial safeguards, and the fortification of governance frameworks. Moreover, the Act establishes the Disaster Risk Management Authority, vested with the mandate to orchestrate and supervise these endeavors. I am delighted to announce that as of May 15 this year, our appointed chairman, board of directors, and managing director stand poised to discharge their pivotal responsibilities in ensuring the preparedness and resilience of the Bahamas. Let me highlight some of the key initiatives we are undertaking. Firstly, the Abaco Shelter Project, which is supported by the UNDP Multi-Country Office in Jamaica and financed by the Government of India. We are constructing a multi-purpose community shelter in Abaco. This shelter is not just a building. It symbolizes our commitment to providing safe havens for our citizens during hurricanes and other disasters. Regular exchanges and dialogues with other countries are integral to this project, ensuring it meets the specific needs of our community. Next, strengthening our DRM governance. Our government has prioritized the development of a strong regulatory environment for climate-resilient infrastructure. Effective enforcement of these regulations is crucial to building a climate-resilient future. We are also enhancing our emergency management arrangements to ensure a swift and coordinated response to disasters. Next, our knowledge exchange and South-South cooperation. We are engaging with other small island development states, SIDS, through platforms like today's symposium to leverage successful practices and experience. Having recently connected with our counterparts at OPPEM, we sought to hear their lessons learned and the key challenges they experienced after enacting their disaster risk legislation. Again, I thank Director General Richard Thompson and his entire team for the extensive exchange of knowledge and information. By participating in the SIDS Network South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund, we are accessing vital technical support for our resilience efforts. Nextly, the community engagement and education. It is paramount to raise citizens' awareness about disaster risk resilience. We are investing in public education campaigns to ensure everyone understands their role in building a resilient community. Next, we have technological integration. We are incorporating advanced technologies in our disaster management strategies. Technology is enhancing our capacity to respond effectively, from unmanned aerial systems to getting rapid data to assess damage and monitor construction projects, to implementation, sophisticated information management systems for housing and building damages assessments. Finally, international partnerships. Our collaboration with international partners, including the UNDP and various donor countries, has been instrumental in advancing our disaster risk resilience agenda. These partnerships provide us with the resources, expertise, and support to implement large-scale resilience projects. Today's symposium features two panels that will delve into these critical areas. The first panel will address governance, focusing on disaster risk and emergency management arrangements. The second panel will explore hurricane-resilient buildings, discussing shelters, housing, and building damage assessments. I encourage all participants to actively engage in these discussions, share their insights, and learn from each other. Our collective wisdom and shared experiences are our greatest assets in building a resilient future. In closing, I thank the UNDP for their unwavering support and all our partners and participants for their commitment to disaster risk resilience. Together, we are making significant strides toward a safer, more resilient Bahamas and Caribbean region. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive and enlightening exchange.
Thank you, Mr. Lundy, for that intervention. And similarly to the thoughts that I think came out based on your intervention, we take note of the fact that you mentioned the pivotal role of governance and the recognition of the importance of readiness and preparedness when we think about disaster, risk recovery, and as well as, you know, ensuring that we are well prepared to advance action when disaster does in fact strike. You also made note of the Disaster Risk Management Act, which we laud, you know, the efforts of the government in being able to put together, because we recognize the importance of supporting both the socioeconomic and other societal components that need to be addressed as we seek to, you know, delve into and address these critical issues. You mentioned two of the initiatives as well that have been ongoing, particularly around the Abaca Shelter Project, which you mentioned as a multi-purpose space that symbolizes a safe haven for community members. We have to recognize that not all persons are, you know, fully equipped to be able to remain in their spaces when disaster does strike. And so with the presence of initiatives such as these shelters, we recognize that we're creating space for them to still be able to be comfortable despite, you know, whatever challenges may arise. The DRM and governance, we also recognize the importance of improving the regulatory environment and ensuring that the activities on the ground have the kind of policy support to be able to ensure that they're implemented. Other recognition of the importance of emergency management, and of course, technological integration into the ongoing disaster assessments. So thank you so much for sharing that. And as we seek to transition into the other aspects of the agenda, we would like to especially thank, you know, Mr. Kade and Mr. Lundy for helping us to provide the kind of background and the kind of necessary information that we require in being able to understand, you know, the different activities, the different interventions, the different concepts that are being prioritized when we think about disaster risk reduction. And so as we transition into this first panel on governance, I want us to reflect on the idea that when we in fact think about governance, we must recognize that it plays a crucial role in disaster risk resilience as it seeks to provide frameworks, policies, and coordination needed to effectively manage and reduce disaster risks. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome our first speaker for this panel, Mr. Alex Storr, Chairman of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority of the Bahamas, for his intervention. Mr. Storr, born Henry Alexander Leon Storr, serves as the Chairman of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority in the Bahamas, spearheading the government's efforts to rebuild in the aftermath of disasters in Abaco and Grand Bahama. His role underscores his resilience and determination to contributing to national recovery and, of course, to development. And outside of his professional endeavors, he finds fulfillment in fatherhood, being a proud parent to 3 adult children, Alexandra, Alexander, and Alyssa. And this facet of his life provides him with perspectives and drives his commitment to building a better future for the next generation. He further holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in Sociology from Barry University in Florida, and is an active participant in the Remnant Tabernacle of Praise. Thank you so much, Mr. Storr, and you now have the floor for your comments.
Thank you, and good morning. And just a side note before I get into the presentation is that we now have to make an amendment to the bio, as of 2 days ago, I am officially the chairman of the Disaster Risk Management Authority. That is essentially what I'm going to speak about right now and the legislation that brought that about. The Disaster Risk Management Act 2022 consolidates the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, NEMA, and the Ministry of Disaster Risk Management into an agile and flexible state-owned enterprise, the Disaster Risk Management Authority. The objectives of the Act are as follows. A, develop and implement a holistic, comprehensive, integrated, and proactive disaster risk management approach to natural hazards. Focus on reducing risks, including the risk of loss of life, health, physical integrity, economic disruption, and environmental damage. Prioritize the protection of vulnerable populations due to age, disability, poverty, lack of resources, physical displacement, or gender. Promote involvement and participation from all relevant sectors and stakeholders at all levels. Now, there are several major policy and principles that the Disaster Risk Management Act brought into effect, and these are as follows. The policy aims to address issues related to disaster risk, guided by principles emphasizing the supremacy of life, security, and health, government financial responsibility in disaster management, consideration of special needs to certain groups, and integration with other public policies. The instruments of the disaster risk management policy include plans for disaster risk management, emergency operations, public body plans, local plans, financial strategies, coordination protocols, information systems, early warning systems, and funds. There's an interministerial committee on disaster risk management that aids in this achieving these objectives, and is composed of various ministers and responsible for advising on the policy, implementation, and related issues. Functions include reporting to Parliament, activating disaster emergency measures, and approving plans and strategies. The Disaster Risk Management Authority, which I now am the chairman and Mr. Sargent is the managing director. The establishment and structure, including a board of directors and a managing director. Functions cover a wide range of responsibilities, from advising the Prime Minister to coordinating disaster response and recovery efforts. And the local and government public body responsibilities include administrators perform functions under the direction of the authority. Public bodies are responsible for analyzing and managing disaster risks within their jurisdiction and assisting in disaster response. Financial management and disaster funds. These were created to aid in efforts in recovery and management efforts. The Minister of Finance develops a comprehensive financial strategy combining investments in disaster risk reduction and adoption of risk instruments. The establishment of Disaster Emergency Fund and Disaster Prevention Fund for funding various disaster-related activities, and these will enable us to make sure that we have funds on hand once a disaster strikes and we aren't scrambling around trying to fund the efforts, any recovery or preparation efforts. Disaster alert and emergency declarations. The Prime Minister can declare a disaster alert or emergency based on the advice from the authority. Activation of disaster emergency measures and identification of disaster zones. And we were actually tested with this. We just officially came into being 2 days ago. And, you know, especially in our region, the concentration is on hurricanes, but we had several wildfires on several islands that gave us a good test run, I guess, of the new authority and showed us some of the shortcomings and some of the successes and things we have to do going forward. disaster response, rehabilitation, and recovery. The authority coordinates disaster response and recovery with the various agencies responsible for the rehabilitation of essential services and recovery of public assets. Humanitarian assistance is provided based on an assessment of needs. On the screen now, you'll see key commencement dates for the Act. I think all of those have now come into force with the board having been appointed just this week. The briefings with the Prime Minister have begun. We have held 2 such briefings with a second being held this month. And we are all now full speed ahead in preparation for this hurricane season, which, as somebody said earlier, is forecasted to be very active with at least 20 to 30 named storms. With the Act coming into force, both NEMA and the DRA have now been dissolved and combined into one agency. This was done on the wishes of the Prime Minister, who wanted one agile authority that could better meet the needs of the changing conditions, both of disasters, as we saw with Dorian, superstorms, and like I said, we had a rush of forest fires over the last couple of days. And so we wanted one agency that would coordinate and combine forces to work to make sure to mitigate and to reduce the risks posed by these threats. The leadership of the authority is led by a chairman and board of directors, deputy chair, and also the managing director. We have very early in our plans began establishing a new operations center, emergency operations center, that's in the planning stages. We hope construction, we are renovating a building, and so hopefully we have that completed within a matter of months. But it is planned to be a state-of-the-art EOC, using all the latest technology, software, and everything to help us in doing our jobs. On the screen is a layout of the new office for the authority, which will also house the EOC. And there you have conceptual drawings of how the finished EOC is slated to look. And so there you had a brief presentation on the DRM authority as well as the new legislation that has been passed. We also plan to work closely with our Caribbean brothers and sisters. You know, all of us, although we have big thoughts and big minds, we have little resources. And so the better we could partner with each other and learn from each other's mistakes and successes, it'll help us to better mitigate whatever is to come. With climate change, we have seen the creation of superstorms. I think last summer has been one of the hottest on record, and so now we have very hot water in the Atlantic, which fuels these storms. And so we're all in this together. Very rarely does a hurricane come and hit one island and leaves all the others unscathed. And so as we come upon this new dispensation of superstorms and quickly emerging threats, we must all work together, whether it's sharing of knowledge or sharing of resources or sharing of manpower to help each other mitigate the upcoming challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Storr, for sharing in relation to the Disaster Risk Management Act as well as the new legislation and what it seeks to address. We take note of the intention to prioritize the activation of emergency measures around disaster risk recovery and response efforts, particularly the investments and adoption of risk instruments and of course the importance of recognizing the range of stressors that we have to contend with, not only hurricanes, but also issues surrounding wildfires. So thank you, sir, for that intervention. And at this moment, I'd like to acknowledge His Worship, the Mayor of Kingston, Councillor Andrew Swaby. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Pleasure to have you. As we move closer to home, and I seek to introduce our second speaker, we have with us Mr. Richard Thompson, Acting Director General in the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. He's currently the Acting Director, and he has a wealth of experience in disaster management and urban planning. With a master's degree in geographic information science and earth observation, he specializes in urban planning and management and has been instrumental in shaping disaster preparedness strategies in Jamaica. Having served as the Deputy Director General at UNDP, as well as in managerial roles at the National Environmental and Planning Agency, he has a deep understanding of disaster management, geographic information science, and of course environmental planning, and has supported and been pivotal in coordinating and managing the National Emergency Operations Centers during disasters and emergencies, facilitating effective communication and logistical operations. So Mr. Thompson, thank you for joining us today here at the UNDP, and you now have the floor, sir, for your intervention.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Let me say good morning to everyone, and especially to our Mayor, Councillor Swaby. I think it's the first official forum I am sitting in, sir, that you are sitting in as Mayor. So let me say congratulations to you on ascending to the chair of Mayor for Kingston. I also want to say a special good morning to Minister Lundy and the Bahamian team. They came to Jamaica a couple weeks ago, or just a month ago, to sit with us to get a fulsome understanding as it relates to our governance procedures in Jamaica. We operate an extensive, and let me say first before I start, good morning to the UNDP team and the other members here sitting with us, the other members of government in Jamaica and the other members of our civil society and all the academia. I'm seeing my good friend sitting there looking rather cool from the University of Technology. It's a pleasure to be invited a second time. I think if you go to someone's home and they invite you back, it meant that you would have been a good guest.
I agree.
So I think I was a good guest at the first forum, and so I was invited back. So I thank the UNDP team for being gracious in asking me to come and sit again at this very special forum. I think you heard the predictions. Some of it is not yet official. We take our prediction from the National Hurricane Center, but all in all the experts are predicting that the 2024 hurricane season will be a very, very active one, probably one of the most active on record. But we despite the numbers, many persons are saying no up to 24. We always say 1, because it actually takes only one system to create total havoc on our environment, our infrastructure, and to retard the economic gains that we would have made over the years. So in understanding our vulnerability, it was essential for, back in the 80s, for the government then to create a very robust governance framework and legislative framework to ensure that Jamaica was on sound footing to deal with disasters. So the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management came out of a situation that happened in 1979. The 1979 flooding lent itself to the development of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. The then government of the day in 1980, under the late former Prime Minister Edward Seaga, made a decision that Jamaica needed an agency that was capable to deal with disasters. And so with effort from our international partners and our local auxiliary, the Jamaica Red Cross, which was the agency then that had a lot of responsibilities for disaster response, put the necessary work in for the government of Jamaica to have a specialized agency with that responsibility. So the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management came into being in 1980 to look at disaster response. Where the globe has gone now, we are looking more at disaster risk reduction and resilience building. So back in the 80s when they set up the office, it came up ahead of the legislative framework. So you normally, and we find that a lot in countries where something would happen and there's a need to ensure that going forward you can deal with that situation, and you have to put in the mechanism to respond to any kind of emergencies or disasters, and then you find that the legislative arrangement will catch up. So our legislative arrangement, the office started in 1980, and our first legislation, which was the act then, was a 1986 legislation. So the Disaster Risk Management, the very famous Disaster Risk Management Act of 2015 is not the first legislation. That wasn't actually in our overall governance and legislative agenda. That was an act that repealed the 1986 legislation and brought into being a more modern type of legislation that luckily for us, with the advent of COVID, given that the legislation was very modern, it allows the government to put in measures to deal with an emergency that was facing the country. So that's from the legislative arrangement, and then coming out of that, even going back to the 1983 legislation. So I'll speak to the 2015 Disaster Risk Management Act, and then I speak to the Disaster Act of 1986. The 1986 legislation allows for, similar to the 2015 legislation, allows for the development of plans, protocols, and procedures to deal with disaster management. So in 1993, we developed a national disaster risk management plan that sets out within that plan a comprehensive governance process for Jamaica. So within that governance process, we operate at three levels. We operate at the national, the local, and the community level in terms of our disaster risk management governance process. At the national level, there's what you call the National Disaster Risk Management Council. Under the first legislation, it was classified as a committee. That was chaired by the Prime Minister. And in looking at the work that went into dealing with the 2015 legislation, in looking at the overall structure, it was decided then by the team, myself, and everyone who was looking at the legislation, that the work on that legislation actually dates back to 2008 in terms of putting in all the necessary wheels to allow the system to turn to where we came out at the back end in 2015. So it sets out the national framework, and so it was classified then as a committee, National Disaster Risk Management Committee. In looking at it, we looked at it extensively, and the thinking was, if the Prime Minister chairs that body, it gives it more credence and it gives it more power if it is a council. You would want your highest governance within your country to be chaired in a committee. And so we make a decision that it should be a National Disaster Risk Management Council, and what was classified as subcommittee of the National Disaster Risk Management Committee then now becomes Committee of Council. And within the national setup, you have 7 committees of council with specific mandate from finance, health planning, emergency operations, social protection and welfare response, information, and I think I said health response as well. So that was set up to ensure that everything within a particular response area had a committee to guide the process, developing work plans of committee, developing the necessary plans that those committees would bring to council for approval and allow council to be more effective. We have been seeing the fruits of that labor with especially with the National Health Planning Committee, which is very effective, and also the welfare component, which is chaired by our Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and includes a lot of members of NGOs and also the government apparatus. That committee has been doing extensive work as well in ensuring that our response procedures and the welfare requirements that comes out of that can be effectively managed and dealt with. So that's really at the national level. At the local level, our process is one where there is no divorce between what happens at the national level and at the local level, because at the local level, where the parish councils, now municipal corporation, I'm an old school planner, so I still tend to say parish councils. Now with the Local Government Act, has rebranded the parish councils to become municipal corporations. So with the now municipal corporation, former parish councils, that's really where the rubber hits the road in terms of what's supposed to be happening at the local level. And so the local level mirrors the national level, similar in terms of the committees at the local level, and so the Disaster Risk Management Committee at the local level is chaired by the mayors, similar to how the national one is chaired by the Prime Minister. And it allowed the mayor, through their committees, their Disaster Risk Management Committee, to put in the necessary framework at the local level, in conjunction with national, at the local level to guide disaster risk management at that level. So there's a lot of work from the welfare and the welfare committees at that local level. And at that level, they have that person with responsibility for disasters, which is the parish disaster coordinator. Within the national level, the interface between the parish disaster coordinator and national is through the regional coordinators, which are embedded within the ODPEM. So that's how it is at the local level. And at the community level now, where the impacts naturally takes place, and where now you have to be looking at what is necessary to build resilience, there is what you call disaster risk management groupings within communities. And then that extend wider to include a number of communities, which we call zonal committees. And that committee, it has its chairmanship, which can be any influential member of the community, to help the community to guide what is happening in the community. So in development planning, you have basically two approaches to development planning. A top-down approach, which you take it from the policy level at the top and you filter it down to what happened in the community. And also you have to look at, as well as a bottom-up approach, community members having a full appreciation of their communities, having a full appreciation of what is necessary for their community to function, and that information comes up to national, and then the necessary process is put in place to allow the communities to effectively respond to themselves. So within the community apparatus, one of the effective mechanisms that allow that apparatus to function is the CERT teams, the Community Emergency Response Teams. So we ensure from the overall governance process that communities are able to respond to themselves. Because I normally, every time I'm doing presentation, I normally ask the audience, if something happened to you, who is the first person that will come to your aid? And it's your neighbor. If you are neighborly. whichever one should be. So once you're neighborly, your neighbor is your first person that will come to your aid. So it is essential that communities are so empowered to respond to themselves within the first 24 hours. So we have been doing a lot of work within that area to ensure that the community mechanism is strong enough where there's a community response teams. There are community response teams. They have a full appreciation of the population that they have to deal with, the persons with disabilities, the elderly, single mother, homes, that thing, and that those areas, and so they can respond to their needs. So that is in terms of national, local, and at the community level. In terms of the response mechanism, the national framework allows for there to be a NEOC, which is a National Emergency Operations Center. And that National Emergency Operations Center is coordinated by the ODPEM, but the National Emergency Operations Center is not the ODPEM. The National Emergency Operations Center is an amalgamation of all the response, what is called the National Response Team, and then it is dependent on the kind of event and the level. So we have level 1, level 2, and level 3 in terms of our national response procedure. Level 1, meaning an emergency would have happened, and we are in an monitoring and observer kind of mode, and that is really just the ODPEM. We have given the notification and we are monitoring the situation. Level 2, we would have had an event and there is a need for a response. So you have a minimal, say, health response, and then that's dealt with by a small group in terms of health, ODPEM, and all the necessary personnel that is needed to respond to that emergency, immediately respond to that emergency. And then level 3 is your Gilbert type of emergency, where the entire nation has been impacted, and there's a need to bring to bear the entire disaster apparatus to respond to the event. So your country is totally shut down, and you now have to respond to the entire country comprehensively, where every member of the response team, every department, ministries, and agency of government have a role to play in the overall response, and persons are embedded in the National Emergency Operations Center. And so whenever that happens, we end up doing response operation roughly 3 to 4 weeks in terms of, dependent on the magnitude of the event. And that response team include the ODPEM as a National Disaster Coordinator, Ministry of Health, Jamaica Defense Force, the Fire Brigade, Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the local apparatus with all the municipal corporation, KCMC, St. Catherine, all of those persons are part of the overall process. And the overall community apparatus as well is activated. So the local will get all the information from the community level, and they push that up through to national and to aid with the response. So that's one aspect in terms of the National Emergency Operations Center setup. In the overall governance process, what is necessary is that there are policy frameworks that guide the overall workings. And so what we're doing now is we have had the agency set up. We have developed national disaster plans. We have developed our legislative arrangement and our legislative framework. And now, given the global setting, climate change, all the processes that are happening globally that has caused countries to be more vulnerable to disasters, and would have seen what would have happened in terms of the global economy coming out of COVID, it is necessary that you have modern, robust policy frameworks to guide the overall process, where you can now look at it based on the global landscape and based on our vulnerabilities as a country. Is our policy robust enough to allow coming out of that policy proper legislative arrangement and proper planning and response arrangement? So what we're doing now, which we are now working to go to the consultation process, is to have a national policy around disaster management. It has gone through the aspect of the Parliament. It is a green paper, and we are working to go through that consultation process in order for the policy to be a white paper and for us now to look at what are the necessary arrangement and amendment that we have to do to our legislation to ensure that based on the authority which is embedded in the legislation that it gives to the Office of Disaster Preparedness and all the other government apparatus, what are we looking now in terms of probably reshaping that kind of authority and now look at your responsibility and accountability, because in your legislative arrangement there are three areas: authority, responsibility, and accountability. So you have the authority, there's a responsibility that you have under the authority that is given to you, and then within that responsibility you have to be held accountable to ensure that you are carrying out your responsibility based on the authority which is embedded or given to you. So we are looking at all of that now, and we are ensuring that as a country that we are doing the necessary work to ensure that ultimately we are protecting our people and we are building resilient, anti-fragile economy. I think we have been ahead of the game in the region for a very long time in terms of having a greater understanding in terms of our disaster setup. External to Jamaica, we're a part of the CDMA mechanism, coming out of the Articles of Arrangement that way back in the 1980s that came about to develop CDMA under a CARICOM mechanism to ensure that there was a regional entity that has the responsibility to look at the overall mechanism for disasters in the region. And Jamaica has been critical in terms of what has happened in the region. Our CDRM framework predates the HFA. So the regional CDRM framework predates the HFA, which is under the overall UN umbrella that has morphed from the Hyogo framework of action and going into the Sendai framework for action. So what it has shown is that Jamaica and the Caribbean has been playing its part extensively in not only shaping disaster risk management in the region, but also shaping disaster risk management globally. And it's because of the experience that we have had over the years and the dedication of not only our technocrats, but also our government apparatus, the governments of the day, dependent on which era we're in, and the current government of the day now, in understanding that disasters can totally erode your economy. And for small island, vulnerable small island developing states, one event can set you back 15, 20 years. Or even more. And I tend to say, my personal opinion is that, and looking at what has happened over the years, is that if you look at disasters impacting Jamaica, where you have roughly 7% of your GDP being impacted, and what is classified as the economics of disaster, where if you put in, you really have to put in $1 at the front end to save $7 at the back end. It would have meant that if you look at it extensively, just think where we would have been as a country in terms of our economic development and our economic gains if we did not have Hurricane Gilbert in 1988. With $4 billion impact at 1988. Just a little food for thought, where we would have been as a country. And then coming on the back of Gilbert, we have had numerous impacts, being one of the most, or the most impacted country in the region over those 20 years, 30 odd years now going after Hurricane Gilbert. So you can see the kind of, you have an economic gain now, you have an impact, and there is some retardation to your economic gain. So you understand that economics of disaster, you now see why it is important to ensure that your governance apparatus is in place, your governance apparatus is robust, and you're putting in measures to sustain and build your economy, where sustainable economic development is the priority. Because ultimately you have to ensure that you are growing your economy and you're protecting your people. I think that is it for my for my intervention. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for not only a history lesson, I'm going to call it, but also the chronology that has led to, the development, the genesis, and the different activities that UNDP has been involved in and continues to be involved in. I think I'm happy to hear about the fact that the institution is shifting with a lot of the priorities that are being established globally, shifting from being primarily around response and now to risk reduction and resilience. Also happy to hear that the plans, protocols, and procedures are particularly intersectional when we think about the host of different issues around welfare, around health, around the inclusion of the community emergency response teams, and the role and the important role that they have to play, hearing about the national versus local and community levels at which the different things are activated, and of course recognizing that there have been varying policy instruments and legislative processes that have been undertaken, and also hearing about the transition and potential incorporation of the policy as a white paper is also something to, for us to be happy about when we think about where we need to be going and ensuring that we're climate proofing our policies. And so thank you so much for that intervention. And as we transition to our final speaker for this panel, we're going to now hear from Mr. Brian Bean. He's the recently appointed Tourism Policy, Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation Manager for the Ministry of Tourism based in Cockburn Town in Grand Turk. He has had a 20-year tenure, and he has served as Director responsible for Canada, the Turks and Caicos Islands government. He has been the Senior Product Development Officer at the Turks and Caicos Tourist Board, and most recently led the Turks and Caicos Islands Tourism Carrying Capacity Study. And he's a graduate of the College of the Bahamas with a BSc in Tourism Management and a Certified Business Advisor for the Hospitality Assured Caribbean Program. He's married to Katharina Missick Bean, and they have two sons, Alexander and Andrew. I recognize that a lot of the participants, their children's names start with A's, so not sure what's happening, but recognizing that there's a trend. So, Mr. Bean, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Observing the protocols established. Good morning, my esteemed panelists and colleagues. I'm delighted to be a panelist this morning on the governance thematic. Kindly accept apologies on behalf of the Honorable Josephine Townley, Minister of Tourism for the Turks and Caicos Islands, who was unable to be here this morning. Even though our ministry does not have oversight of disaster risk resilience as before, the collaborative approach ensures synergy as you're only as strong as your weakest link. The Turks and Caicos Islands first saw the real integration of disaster risk management in the tourism industry in 2007 via the Caribbean Tourism Organization's Multi-Hazard Project, a regional public good funded by CDMA and IDB. Since then, there has been a close affinity. Tourism is considered to be one of the few industries that could possibly allow countries to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Our participation is testament that this is truly an industry that can, of course, bring about disaster resilience. The country is guided by the Disaster Management Ordinance. Disaster management falls under the remit of the National Security Council in general, and the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies, DDME in particular.
Okay.
However, the structure allows for an integrated approach. The DDME has provided a plethora of training sessions in an effort to build local capacity and resilience. The National Disaster Management Structure, NDMS, manages the Turks and Caicos Islands Disaster Management Program. The structure comprises of Executive Policy Committee, which is chaired by the Governor, the National Disaster Advisory Committee, the National Operations Group, which has 8 subcommittees, of which the Ministry of Tourism heads the Environment Assessment and Planning Subcommittee, and of course, island committees. On 20th of October 2003, we enacted the Disaster Management National Systematic Shutdown Regulations 2023 under Section 64(2)(c) of the Disaster Management Ordinance. These new regulations provide government with the legal framework to implement a phased systematic shutdown of the Turks and Caicos Islands, or a phased systematic shutdown of any island that can be impacted by a hazardous event. The regulations include the following components: national shutdown order, offense and fixed penalty, staggered approach, public and private sector shutdown policies, essential services, and all clear reactivation procedures. The national shutdown order. Her Excellency the Governor, under the guidelines, issues a shutdown order requiring the closure of businesses and services and restricting the movement of persons within the islands. The issuance of the shutdown order would have an effect for every sector within the islands. A shutdown order can be issued after the Turks and Caicos Islands have been issued a warning notification, for example, in relation to tropical storms or hurricanes. In terms of the offense, a shutdown order would be issued with a timeline required for enforcement. Individuals and businesses who fail to comply with such a shutdown order may be found liable for committing an offense and be sentenced to a fine of $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years or both. Fixed penalty. The Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force, as the enforcers, can issue a ticket to individuals and businesses found to have been in breach of a shutdown order. An individual opting to plead guilty can produce the ticket to a clerk at the magistrate's court on or before the date present on the ticket and present payments as fines as follows. Individuals can be charged a fine of $500 and businesses can be charged a fine of up to $5,000. In terms of the staggered approach, the national shutdown order can be issued utilizing a staggered approach to allow for private and public essential services identified in the regulations to implement systematic closure of operations for as long as possible towards the enforcement time. It is intended that this approach will allow national operations to smoothly transition towards closure. Essential services. The regulations identifies essential services and agencies for both private and public sector. The general public is encouraged, of course, to become familiar with the services and agencies that are listed. The all clear. The regulations provide the government with the right to issue an all clear for reactivation of the Turks and Caicos Islands. The general public is reminded that residents are required to remain indoors, of course, until the all clear is being given. At the end of the day, the DDME, of course, continues to execute on their end, maintain and monitor resources by the way of policy development and continuous review and update of their ordinances that have a direct impact, especially on the #1 industry in the country, tourism. This is evident in the current existence of a local Met Office that was not included in previous management plans, of course, because it didn't exist. And at this time, I'd like to thank the Bahamas who, of course, over the years have provided assistance and continue to do so. To implement effective disaster management programs and to enhance disaster resilience throughout the TCI, training and liaising with critical stakeholders is important to improve efficiency in monitoring. Quite recently, the United Nations Tourism Barometer listed the Turks and Caicos as having been the best performing destination for the Americas in January through December 2023, coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Strong engagement and participation was truly realized, especially when it came to the decision-making process. Of course, during this time, we would have had various focal groups who would have, of course, partake in the proactive protocols that would have been locally based in terms of our bouncing back and getting back into tourism. This resulted, of course, in the safe return of inbound stopover visitors, as well as that of cruise passengers to the country, through the establishment of national tourism health protocols within the tourism and health discipline via quality control. Additionally, I must applaud the DDME, who is no longer a department within our ministry, for their additional work that they did when it came to implementing strategies to achieve the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, EMAP, and providing the visibility of the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies and the diversification of the tourism product with focus on community-based tourism, of course. The Turks and Caicos Islands, as you know, is driven by tourism as many of our other sister states. So we will focus, of course, as it relates to tourism resilience. The TCI is largely coastal, with a third of the country being protected within our national protected area system. And of course, visitors coming to the TCI come to enjoy nature. So the Ministry of Tourism in particular, we try our best to ensure that issues such as food security and biosecurity, of course, are paramount when it comes to that of resilience. And of course, resilience in terms of prevention and management of invasive species is crucial for the maintaining of health and integrity of our ecosystems. From an agricultural standpoint, we seek to improve food security status of the Turks and Caicos Islands by implementing the agro-park as an area of intensive agro-production, which seeks to integrate all facets of agricultural value chain from pre-production activities, land clearing, access roads, irrigation, and drainage, to production, post-harvesting, and of course, the marketplaces that take place throughout the country in terms of distribution points. In terms of risk management, we've seen, of course, the establishment of biosecurity units within the Department of Agriculture, as well as collaboration and partnership alongside education and outreach. In regards to monitoring and adaptive management, we seek to promote the protection and sustainable utilization of natural resources throughout the TCI. When it comes to that of our coastal environment, we try to ensure that work continues as it relates to the implementation of marine spatial planning in the Turks and Caicos Islands and other standards such as III code audit for oil spill response and the likes through our local Department of Environment and Coastal Resources, as well as our Fisheries Department, who continues to promote sustainable fisheries through the development and implementation of fisheries policy, strategy, and management plans for the country. What stands out most to us in terms of resilience from a tourism standpoint is quite recently, we established a tourism carrying capacity model project that would seek to design and develop a tourism carrying capacity model for the Turks and Caicos Islands that can permanently monitor all impacts generated by the tourism industry in the country, provide useful information for tourism stakeholders as well as that of the local population and government to define sustainable tourism policies and strategies. This study balanced the interests of public and private sectors, visitors, and residents, sharing the responsibilities of planning and development. What is our end result? Appropriately being able to allocate resources or implement moratoriums based on the result to ensure greatest possible good to our community. Better contribution to sustainability, competitiveness, of course, of the TCI. The triple bottom line can be considered as the 3 Ps, namely planet, people, and profit. This project, initiated in 2023, has to craft a tourism carrying capacity model based on the multi-island nature of the Turks and Caicos Islands product, inclusive of physical planning, disaster risk management, econometrics, and others. The primary objective, of course, as I mentioned, was to design and develop a comprehensive framework that permanently monitors all impacts generated by the tourism industry, with phase 1 being the primary objective to establish a robust foundation for the tourism carrying capacity, where we had an in-depth analysis of the situation being conducted, exploring the existing dynamics and challenges posed by the tourism industry in the Turks and Caicos Islands, along with surveys for stakeholders that were conducted, emphasizing collaboration and engagement with a diverse array of stakeholders to gather perspectives and insights. At the end, we would want to see best practice analysis being done, aiming to draw inspiration from successful global models and identify practices adaptable to the unique context of the Turks and Caicos Islands. The definition of the carrying capacity model emerged as the synthesis of these components, resulting in a tailored model poised to guide the sustainable development of the Turks and Caicos Islands and also be used as a risk tool. The second phase, of course, saw focus on validating the carrying capacity model, which involved a thorough examination and incorporation of stakeholder feedback to ensure the model's robustness and resilience to challenges. Pavel Euro, who was the consultant chosen for the project, presented the concept of the carrying capacity model with 3 sub-models being presented and discussed, namely the provenance model that would have focused on issues in terms of gentrification and housing that of course ties into resilience, and Grand Turk, which would have had issues being presented as relates to the protection of heritage and culture, and what is known as the other islands that make up the Turks and Caicos Islands, which would have focused primarily on that of issues surrounding environmental controls prior to development. Notably, our advisory committee, which I headed at the time, of course, accepted the concept representing the way forward in terms of future development for the Turks and Caicos Islands. The final phase marked the practical implementation of the carrying capacity model, representing a transition from the theoretical design to a real-world impact. Data analysis and launching of the carrying capacity model with a specific focus on indicator selection, data collection, and comprehensive analysis. The selection of indicators were executed with precision, reflecting diverse aspects of the tourism impacts for complete comprehension. Simultaneously, data collection and elaboration involved meticulous gathering of analysis of relevant data, ensuring the model was grounded in accurate information was provided. I must say at this time also that the carrying capacity model, of course, will be tied into our risk mitigation going forward in terms of the government understanding through an unbiased approach what are the critical pressures that we face, because in the Turks and Caicos Islands, 70% of our GDP is truly dependent on tourism, and we want to ensure that the impact that's given, be it housing, development, be it attractions or any other services, of course, is truly considered unbiasedly prior to development. So on behalf of the Minister of Tourism, I thank you for allowing me to present this morning and be a part of this great committee.
Thank you as well, Mr. Bean, for sharing with us about tourism and the role that the ministry has played in supporting the SDGs broadly, but more so support for resilience building in the TCI. And so having discussed the governance mechanisms in place, we now turn our attention to the efforts being undertaken to create resilient, a resilient built environment, particularly when we think about hurricanes. And in this second panel, we will explore varying initiatives that have aimed to enhance resilience and sustainability. And so our first speaker is Mr. Aaron Sargent, the Acting Managing Director of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority in the Bahamas. And he will speak to us about the Abaco Shelter Project in particular, which is a model of climate resilience. Mr. Sargent has a decade of experience managing and leading teams towards strategic business goals, and he has served as communications manager at Hands for Hunger, a local nonprofit organization. He has also worked in the capacity as assistant general manager at the Bahamas Agricultural and Industrial Corporation, and in his current tenure at the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, he has led crucial initiatives, including the relaunch of the Abaco Hurricane Shelter and Community Center project and the relaunch of the Homeowners Assistance and Repair Program and debris management sites post Hurricane Dorian. Thank you so much, Mr. Sargent, and you now have the floor, sir, for your intervention.
All right, good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you again for the warm introduction, standing on the protocols that have already been established. Firstly, like Chairman would have alluded to earlier, Chairman Starr would have alluded to earlier, our positions have changed. We now are, I'm now the Managing Director of the Disaster Risk Management Authority, and we are excited to share some of the challenges, the wins that that occurred during the build-out on the current build-out of our Abaco Shelter project, that we just recently had a site visit with some of the UNDP team members as well as our contractor and project manager. Just going through the initial concept and vision. Immediately following Hurricane Dorian, it highlighted the need for to build the country's capacity in terms of hurricane shelters. Literally, buildings in terms of schools, local buildings such as those churches were used as shelters. And Dorian showed us that most of those buildings were impacted, and residents having to move from various places to shelter from the impacts of that catastrophic weather event. Local leaders and community organizations collaborated to conceptualize the project and aiming to create a resilient and safe space for residents. The government also recognized the project's value and committed to creating a safe space for the community. Unfortunately, the first year of the project experienced several challenges, and some of those challenges included right after the commencement, there was the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in lockdowns and disruptions in terms of supply chain. How the project began, planning and funding. Through various stakeholders, including central and local government, nonprofits, businesses, and international partners, like the UNDP and the Indian government, funding was provided for the support and build-out of the project. The initial design and architectural plans focused on safety, compliance with local building codes, accessibility, and sustainability. And so I'd also like just to touch on initially the initial plans that were laid on that were on the table utilized a trademarked building design, but in consulting with our local partners and stakeholders on the ground, we discovered that it may be better suited because the Bahamas is an archipelago of islands. Getting equipment in that may not be readily available locally was a challenge. In the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, our Ministry of Works, which is responsible for building control, also improved on its building codes for shelters, and that they should be built to withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds. The initial concepts were to withstand 150-mile-per-hour winds, but after that change was made, we, along with the project management team, would have revisited and redesigned the project to be able to withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds. The status of the project today, I'm happy to announce, and I'm very pleased with the work on site. The current status is that the main structure is up. We are, as of a week ago, we are out of the ground completely. And for those who may be aware and have been following the project, we had some severe challenges based on where the shelter is situated. While it's highland and probably one of the highest points in Abaco, it's sat on what they call in construction terms a honeycomb. Basically, there were lots of cavities, and so it required massive remediation efforts. But I'm happy to announce that our engineering team utilized their innovation to develop the proper systems that would allow the structure to stand as it is standing today. We are waiting the shipment of the roof trusses, and then the interior work and windows will be installed shortly. The goal is to complete the project well before the December end date. We are currently on pace to have the building ready by August. In terms of being not completely ready, when I say ready by August, in the event that we have an impending weather system and there needs to be a shelter activated, we can utilize the building. It may not have all of the interior finishes done, but it will be enclosed and operable. The status of the project today continued. The community involvement, regular community meetings and updates are being conducted to keep residents informed. Training sessions for shelter and staff managers are planned and are in the works. The unique hurricane resilient features. The architectural design. The shelter is built using wind-resistant materials and construction techniques designed to withstand severe weather conditions up to 200 miles per hour. Flood mitigation systems are also installed, such as elevated foundation, advanced drainage solutions, and integrated that are all integrated to protect against water damage and flooding. In speaking with our project managers, they oftentimes we talk about the flooding and how it was built way far above the road level. And one of the key things that we wanted to know when we initially relaunched the project is if there's a flood, because Abaco experienced severe flooding to the point where people had to be rescued from their roofs. And we wanted to find out exactly, if a similar situation was to happen, would this shelter be impacted? And the answer is that we are well above sea level. And if there is flooding at the shelter, that means we need to evacuate the entire island. So we were pleased with the level of thought that was placed into the architectural design and the build out of this structure. Sustainable features, the shelter will include energy efficient systems such as solar panels and backup generators. The backup generator is in country, which was graciously donated by the U.S. Embassy. And that is to ensure that we have continuous operation during power outages. Water storage and purification systems are in place to provide clean water during emergencies. The impact on community, safety and security. The shelter provides a safe and secure location for residents during hurricanes, reducing the risk of injury and loss of life. There are enhanced emergency response capabilities with trained personnel and well-equipped facilities. Community engagement. The project includes workshops and preparedness training for community members, improving overall disaster readiness. There will be opportunities for residents to volunteer and contribute to the project, fostering a sense of ownership and community spirit. One of the things that we are internally working on, while in the midst of our transition to a newly formed agency, is collaborating with the local stakeholders on the ground to actually manage this multi-purpose shelter site in terms of its day-to-day operations once we have completed the construction phase. And so we're looking to appoint members to a volunteer committee who will have management oversight and report to the authority of the day-to-day operations of the center. Key challenges and lessons learned. So we had, like I said, foreshadowed earlier, we had a number of unexpected obstacles. The project faced delays due to adverse weather. In Abaco, from time to time during the rainy season, it rains daily. And so that was a major challenge for us last year. The lack of geotechnical information and accurate geotechnical information. As you can see to the right in the video, those are some of the cavities that, and at some point, even if you look at the gentleman, he's actually standing in one that were nearly 6 to 7 feet tall. And so our engineering team were stretched to figure out solutions to remedy those situations. And so that took a while to ensure that the building would not be compromised. There were also supply chain disruptions, which caused some delays in receiving necessary materials. Adaptations and improvements. The design and construction practices were modified to address challenges such as reinforcing structural elements and improving supply chain coordination. Enhanced collaboration with local authorities and organizations to streamline processes to ensure compliance and safety standards. Another thing for us is trying to figure out also, as we look to start a pilot program, this shelter would be used as the backdrop for building an additional 6 to 7 shelters throughout the country. And it is trying to find creative ways to scale up this model without scaling price points to a point where that it's unattainable. So we are also looking at creative ways and solutions to do that, such as steel fabrication externally. We are meeting with various stakeholders. We've shown them the layout and the design. And so trying to keep the similar model. This model can be extended, multiple times. And so there's a lot of room to expand from using this footprint. Key takeaways. The importance of flexibility and adaptability in project management were highlighted, ensuring that projects can continue despite setbacks. Strong partnerships with organizations like the UNDP and other donors, as well as community support, were crucial in overcoming challenges and driving the project forward. Summary of the project. The Hurricane Shelter Project, initiated to address the community's need for a safe haven during severe weather events, has made significant progress from its conceptual stage to its current construction phase. Emphasizing resilience and sustainability, the shelter features wind-resistant materials, flood mitigation systems, and energy-efficient technologies. The project has engaged the community through regular updates, training sessions, and volunteer opportunities will be provided to enhance overall disaster preparedness. Despite facing several challenges, the project has adapted and improved, underscoring the value of flexibility and strong partnerships. This initiative has not only strengthened the community's safety, but also fostered a spirit of collaboration and resilience. I'd like to thank again the UNDP, Mr. Kishan Cody and his team for continuously working with the Bahamas government, the current Disaster Reconstruction Authority, to facilitate this project and move it forward. But there was also always a commitment to complete this project, even when we had issues of delays that were outside of our control. We found creative ways to ensure that the project continued. And we are excited to have the opening later this year and the project completed and turned over to the residents of Abaco as to serve as a beacon of hope in times of disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent, for highlighting for us the importance of these shelters in helping to build the country's capacities. We recognize that these will definitely serve as safe spaces for communities. And we also recognize that, while challenges were experienced, the team was quite flexible in being able to adjust and adapt and being able to ensure that, you're on target for advanced completion later this year in August. And so thank you so much for sharing that and for highlighting the importance of this intervention. Our next speaker in this panel is Ms. Anila Kehaya, and she's an information management specialist at UNDP's Crisis Bureau, where she leads the technical implementation of damage and needs assessments in Latin America and the Caribbean. She has implemented post-crisis assessments in some 15 countries and delivered over 40 assessments and infrastructural training sessions to over 50 UNDP country offices globally. We'll now hear from Anila as she speaks to us specifically on the UNDP's Housing and Building Damage Assessment Tool. Anila, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can see the screen that I'm projecting. Yes.
You're able to see.
So I would like to start out by saying that between 1997 and 2017, 25% of all disasters in the world occurred in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. Over 90% of the 277 million people who were affected by climatic events such as floods and storms. The rising number and recurrence of extreme weather events is increasingly becoming an everyday reality for populations in the region. In crisis situations, there is a need for real-time data on the impact and needs of communities to guide effective response, recovery, and reconstruction efforts. Through the Digital Assessments team, UNDP supports country offices globally in collecting data that captures valuable information about damage and socioeconomic impact on the ground, no matter the type of crisis, be it conflict, disaster, climate risks, or social and economic shocks. By employing digital tools and methodologies, these post-crisis assessments, like the Household and Building Damage Assessment that I will be presenting today, provide clarity and insights important for making timely policy decisions that leave no one behind. In general, the Household and Building Damage Assessment is a rapid, flexible, evidence-based, end-to-end digital tool. It captures disaggregated data on gender, socioeconomic level, disabilities, etc., information on people and building damage due to natural and man-made hazards. Most importantly, the Household and Building Damage Assessment displays this data in user-friendly dashboards where patterns and trends can be observed, helping authorities to rebuild, monitor progress, and make informed policy decisions. Some of the key features of the Household and Building Damage Assessment. As I mentioned, it's an end-to-end digital tool, and we use this phrasing because all of the underlying platforms are digital, which enables rapid collection of georeference data on damage and needs. The toolkit is adaptable because we have a library of questions with modular sections on location, the use of the building and infrastructure, the size, damage and repairs, services, debris, preparedness aspects. And from this modular library of questions, relevant questions can be pulled based on the context and the assessment objectives in that specific country. The toolkit is also adaptable to context and objectives, as I mentioned, and analysis and visualization is a key factor where the data is presented in these dashboards that are user-friendly. In terms of flexibility, it's very easy to integrate new technologies, as I'll show later on in this quick presentation. We've been able to integrate satellite imagery, drone imagery, social media analysis, so we can combine different data sources for a more holistic view of what's happening on the ground. And then lastly, and probably the most important aspect and feature, is that the toolkit really informs the evidence-based and swift decision-making that's so necessary in crisis situations. In terms of the importance of the toolkit, moving from a traditional paper-based model to a digital solution has many different advantages. We would be saving time and resources on printing out paper forms and transcribing those results. But most importantly, we're leveraging existing technology that's already available out there and for no cost a lot of the time. And we're strengthening local analytical capacities. And this point in particular is extremely important because we work with local communities, with local teams of engineers and community colleges, as you can see in the picture on the screen. So we really strengthen those local capacities so that these assessments can be implemented fast and in an effective way. In terms of the data management process, without getting too much into detail on this process, this is a generalized view of some of the tools and platforms we tend to use. So we use Kobo Toolbox, which functions both online and offline, so it's very suitable for more challenging field conditions where we build the form, the survey, and that is the tool that would be used on mobile devices to collect data in the field. Then we analyze this data through dashboards on Microsoft Power BI, and this data is also visualized through Power BI as well as ASRI's platforms like ArcGIS. The categorization of damages identified through household and building damage assessment depends very much on the local context and the type of hazard. The categories and criteria are discussed and agreed upon by relevant stakeholders, including the government and local engineers and architects. We tend to use a color rating or a traffic light system to make the findings more accessible. The color coding methodology can be integrated into Kobo Toolbox through formulas, allowing for damage categories to be assigned based on the information on damage that's been entered by the enumerators on the field. Before submitting the survey, typically the enumerator is asked to confirm whether the suggested color tagging is right or not. So we've really tried to minimize the subjectivity in categorizing those damages. So we rely on this methodology and formulas that are integrated and personalized for each case. On the second point, the intent of the cost estimation procedure is to provide a program level cost estimate to complement the household and building damage assessment data collected post-disaster to inform UNDP and partners on response strategies. It's based on a 6-step methodology that our engineers crafted, and this is integrated into the data visualization tool so that we have these cost estimations as well for planning purposes. And lastly, debris estimation is another aspect of the toolkit. As I said, to minimize subjectivity when assessing debris that's generated by crises, we have formulas that are based on the building footprint and damage categorization so that these calculations happen almost automatically on the back end. Here is a typical timeline of the household and building damage assessment. It can take a total of 3 to 6 weeks, depending on its scale and methodology, the size of the teams that are on the ground, the length of the questionnaire, so many different aspects there that would influence how long or short this process is, but we always start with technical definition. And this is where assessment objectives, the scope, methodology, and stakeholders are defined. This is also where we use those modular sections of the questionnaire that I mentioned for the assessment. They're selected in consultation with the government in order to assess the damage in the affected areas and according to the needs. After the technical definition is in place, the questionnaire has been developed. We have the enumerators already lined up and ready to go. We first train them. These are typically local teams, as I mentioned. They're recruited and trained on how to gather data using an app via mobile device. Oftentimes, we collaborate with engineering schools where we train engineering students, and then experts are recruited as team leaders, or the engineering professors would lead these smaller teams while they do field work. The next step would be field assessment. And of course, this timeline would depend on the scale and all the factors that I mentioned already. But this is where the inspector teams facilitate the sectorization of the area that's to be assessed, do any spot checks, and collect the data on the field. The data collected is immediately uploaded in the system for cleaning, verification, analysis, and quality control. In terms of reporting, data is automatically analyzed and visualized via the dashboards and compiled for real-time reporting. And most important, this data, oftentimes property of the relevant government with which we're working, is used for evidence-based decision-making processes. Here I have a couple of examples of the ways in which the data that we've collected on the ground has directly informed decision-making, which is the end goal of every assessment that we implement in the field. So in this particular case, Dominican Republic, after the devastating impact of Hurricane Fiona, in 2022, a household and building damage assessment was conducted. And based on the data that was collected on needs and local vulnerabilities, UNDP was able to provide targeted housing and business support in 2013 to more than 200 affected people in Sabana de la Mar, the hardest hit town. The results of the HPDA have informed the remarkable progress made toward community recovery and resilient reconstruction. The homes and electrical systems of over 100 most vulnerable people in the town were repaired, and a special focus was placed on supporting female-headed households who tend to be disproportionately affected by disasters. On the second example, we'll focus on Belize, and the findings of a post-crisis assessment played a crucial role in prioritizing resources and targeting support. The socioeconomic impact assessment that we conducted in Belize provided valuable information to help micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to recover from the effects of the global pandemic. The collected data directly helped identify a need for increased digital literacy. And in 2022, almost 300 MSMEs completed trainings on topics including technology, digital marketing, content development. A national MSME roadshow and a virtual knowledge center was also created, as well as 14 digital connect centers, providing safe spaces, computers, and reliable internet, in 14 relatively poor and largely rural communities. And lastly, in terms of examples, the digital assessment team trained representatives of local and national Honduran institutions in 2023 in San Pedro Sula to conduct a household and building damage assessment. The results of the assessment revealed the difficult circumstances faced by communities in flood and landslide-prone areas. The findings, which included the overwhelming percentage of households living on meager incomes and the high incidence of flooding during tropical storms, highlighted the urgent need for risk-aware municipal emergency plans. So in a significant stride toward enhancing local governance and community resilience, a roadmap was developed to strengthen the emergency management and response capacities of the Association of Municipalities of Honduras. So these three examples give us a bit of an overview on the different types of decision-making that real-time data, rapid data from the ground can help inform. Here I'll present very quickly just a few dashboard examples. Since I mentioned dashboards a few times, you'll be able to see a little bit more visually what certain screenshots of these dashboards would entail. There's typically multiple pages, and this is an interactive and dynamic dashboards where you can click on filters and you have results reflected on the screen. But just for the sake of this presentation, very briefly, you'll be able to see the number of buildings that have been surveyed, the disaggregation between residential, commercial, mixed use, public buildings, etc. As you can see on the map, all of the data is geo-referenced. We're using the traffic light system where we can see where is that minor, major, medium damage. And then we also have pictures associated with each of the buildings that has been assessed. This is another example of a dashboard from the Dominican Republic. And by the way, the one that I just showed was from the Bahamas. So probably a lot of you in the room are familiar with it and have seen it because you were involved in this process after Hurricane Dorian. So very important. We've worked with the government of the Bahamas even after, and we did preparedness trainings, and such a pleasure to work with such a good team that's really interested in keeping up with updates and making sure that the tool reflects those questions depending on the needs of the assessing teams. So we've really been doing constant work there. Onto the other example, there's the Dominican Republic example after Hurricane Fiona. We'll be able to see similar elements here on this screenshot, but 2,500 buildings were evaluated, and we can see the cost estimation on the screen, the breakdown of the different types of buildings, as well as the georeference data. And then last example, this is one from Colombia, and the islands, the specific one that you see on the screen is the island of Santa Catalina, but we did the assessment in both the island of Santa Catalina and Providencia. Similarly, georeference data, pictures, needs and damage are all reflected in the dashboard. And as you can see on the top of the dashboard, there's filters that can be used to filter different results and see how those findings change and try to detect those patterns and observations. This is more of a dynamic view of the result of the data analysis and how we were able to integrate the drone imagery, and as you zoom in, you get a clear view of where the damage happened and the pictures of the buildings that have been assessed. So honestly, the team in Colombia did a great job with integrating these newer technologies into the HPDA, so kudos to them. With this example, I close. I would like to mention that HPDA training and deployment can be requested by contacting your focal point at the UNDP multi-country office in Jamaica. So if there's any interest, we're very happy to be in contact and provide any support that you may need. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you as well, Ms. Kahaya, for highlighting to us the housing, building, and damage assessment tool, and more so the important role that real-time data contributes and continues to play as it relates to swift evidence-based decision-making, particularly when we think about how quickly we need to act when disaster strikes. So thank you so much again for your intervention. Our final speaker for today on this panel and for the event is Mr. Hartley Eugene Thompson II. He's a UNDP engineer and architect, and he will elaborate on another intervention, specifically the mobile technical assistance centers in the Bahamas. Mr. Hartley obtained a diploma in architectural design and construction technology from the College of the Bahamas, and he has worked throughout the Bahamas in the architectural engineering and communications fields for the past 45 years, most recently retiring from the Bahamas Telecommunications Company as technical manager after 27 years of service. And so today he continues in private practice based in Freeport, Grand Bahama, offering project management, architectural, and consulting services. Mr. Hartley, the floor is now yours for the final intervention for today. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon. Protocol having been established, it's just an honor and an opportunity for me to present today. I've been asked to give an overview of the Technical Assistance Center, TAC, which was implemented by the UNDP under the Hurricane Dorian project. I wanted to be sure that we're all aware of what a TAC is. When I first took possession of this equipment, I didn't realize what it was, but it's a very beautiful piece of equipment, and it served its purposes well. 2 identical vehicles were delivered, one to Grand Bahama and one to Abaco. The general features of the TAC vehicle: it has a retractable 15-foot awning. There's a built-in generator. It has generous exterior cargo storage. It comes with a ladder that allows you to access the roof deck. It's fully air-conditioned, and there are bucket seats. In the interior, and there's a picture of it, there's a dining work table, and that table can actually fold down and with cushions create a bed for two additional persons. There's a fully stacked kitchen, microwave, a walk-in shower, toilet and basin with a private bathroom. There's a separate area with a double bed, storage cabin, and a flat screen TV, all within 24 feet of vehicle. How did it work? A tripartite partnership involving the UNDP, who hired 1 engineer, myself, per TAC, 1 in Grand Bahama and 1 in Abaco, and funded the operational costs. The DRA, a government agency for coordination of all activities with other public agencies and providing staff for their programs. The Rotary Club of the Bahamas provided loan of the vehicle during the project. How it worked, and information how to aid resilient reconstruction. This vehicle was able to go into the affected areas that were still without electricity, internet, access, or transportation. And most of the residents in these areas were unable to visit the DRA offices. So having the equipment, the vehicle in their communities helped to provide more residents with the requisite information and access to registration with the Small Homes Repair Program. The TAC connected persons to services and expertise necessary for reconstruction. It provided information on bringing in building materials tax-free through the consolidated tax form for the special economic recovery zones into the affected areas. The TAC also provided information on NGOs who are also working in their communities who may have further been able to help the residents. How it worked: 1 month after the TAC began to operate, COVID came along, and therefore serious adjustments had to be made, along with the mandatory lockdowns that came with the COVID protocols. So the TAC was unable to offer in-person consultations or allow persons to enter the vehicle. Our team developed the alternative of creating a series of virtual training webinars, which were hosted by the technical experts, Nick Sims, myself, along with Etoile Pinder. These allowed us to reach a wide audience composed of homeowners, contractors, NGOs, staff members working in Grand Bahama and the Abacos, engineers, architects, and other industry stakeholders. Once the lockdowns were lifted, we concentrated on home inspections and verifications for the small home repair program. Successes, there were a total of 6 virtual training webinars, and these were held between November 2020 and February 2021. This would have been one of the advertisements for the Build Smarter webinar. During these 6 webinars, these are the topics that were covered. Talking about resiliency, we wanted to inform the people, the viewers, in a way that was very clear for them to understand. Even persons who had no construction knowledge, they would still be able to understand or ask the questions that were necessary. So we covered foundations, timber frame wall construction, masonry wall construction. We did a high-level overview for the NGO managers and staff working in the Abacos on foundations, timber frame walls, and masonry wall construction. There were many NGOs here, some dealing with water, some dealing with energy, and they themselves knew very little about building. But because they were a part of the process, we thought it was necessary to give them a high-level overview as well. We also dealt with timber, roof construction, and hurricane readiness and home maintenance. You would note that these webinars are still listed on the sites that we have below. Again, here's another example of the virtual webinar, and you would see that at that time we had 459 views. So it shows that people were interested and they did take the time to attend and participate in the webinars. The team developed and devoted many hours of research, documentation, and preparation to ensure that the live webinar shows were technically informative and factual, yet simple enough for the average layperson to understand. Again, the recordings for the events are still available on Facebook and have been shared widely. Successes. Again, the TAC provided assistance to the Small Homes Repair Program. The TAC was deployed to assist the DRA with inspections and assessments throughout Grand Bahama. The highest priority in these inspections, we did 71 applications where persons received final inspections to ensure that the work had been completed. Verification was needed for contractors to be paid balances of funds. The second priority, we were able to touch 279 applicants, and these applicants received 50% inspections to ensure that scope of works were being followed. Verification needed for contractor to receive intermediate payment to progress restoration works to completion stage. The lowest priority category, we were able to visit in the Technical Assistance Center 398 applicants, and they received inspection and assessment to determine what level of funding the DRA would extend to the homeowners. So in total, we were able to do 748 visits and inspections, assessments during that time. Another big highlight is the TAC was able to cover the entire island of Grand Bahama from east to west. You just have a sample here of the information that would have been taken, and while this is handwritten, all of it was entered. This was handwritten on the road as we went along, but it was all entered in spreadsheets at the end of the day. You would notice that coordinates are also given. You were able to take note of what was done on the interior, the exterior, and also comment on the quality of the work. Also, the level of damage would have been noted on our inspection reports. Lesson learned. One, the faster mobilization, now that the groundwork has been done and TACs are in place. We'll be able to get to the homeowners and contractors in the early stages of rebuilding when critical materials and methods are being utilized. We realized that it took a while to get the project started, and when people are out of their homes and displaced, a lot of them began to use materials and methods that were not adequate, not resilient. So once you start, it's very difficult to come back to where you should be. So lessons learned is that we need to be able to mobilize very fast after these situations. Secondly, documentation is critical and time consuming. A spreadsheet had to be created and maintained for each DRA client. A separate spreadsheet and database had to be updated for UNDP, inclusive of GPS coordinates for each assessment, photos, uploads, scanning of signed reports for each house assessed. Thirdly, the lesson learned was the operation of the TAC is best suited for a two-person team, considering 1 and 2 above it. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the UNDP, thank you to the DRA, thank you to the Rotary Club, and thank you for all who assisted even here today in the presentations.
Thank you as well, Mr. Arthur Eugene Thompson, for sharing the info on the tax. I'm calling them tax now. I've adopted your acronym. And their versatility in being able to connect persons to the services and expertise necessary, not only around building smarter, but also especially in light of the COVID-19 challenges that were being faced. And so at this point, we would like to open the floor for our round of questions and answers. Another reminder is that we are live on the UNDP and GIS's Facebook and YouTube pages, and we will be able to facilitate questions both from the audience here in Kingston as well as those participating via Zoom. So we're asking our Zoom participants that they indicate their intention to either pose a comment or question by raising their hands, and they will be acknowledged and will also be allowed to share. We're also inviting persons to share their comments and questions in the chat if they are unable to speak. So the floor is now open. We are inviting persons here in the room as well to pose whatever questions you may have to any of the panelists online or here in person. And we're also inviting our virtual audience to do the same.
So let me take the opportunity to kick it off, break the ice, and just to say what an amazing roundup actually of experiences from the countries and territories that are participating. I think that was quite a tour de force in terms of seeing the diversity of the governance arrangements, the policies arrangements, and institutions actually that are being put in place, and how communities and governments have been really responding in the last few years to some of these crises, looking forward, but also the downstream capacities and approaches that are taking place through specific tools, through specific technology, whether high tech or low tech, and how this can really help communities. So I just wanted to kick it off with that. I think it's a rich set of experiences and lessons actually for taking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kishan, for sharing that. We recognize as well that our online participants have been sharing their questions. The first question from Anthony Hossang, it asks, what are we doing to protect our shorelines in the region? I'm not sure if any of the panelists are able to answer that question specifically. Okay. We have a response in the room.
Well, first, let me say it is important in order for us to look at our coastal features and the kind of coastal prevention system that we have to put in place. Whenever time we have any kind of systems passing through the region, we tend to have extensive coastal flooding and coastal scoring. So a lot of work we have been doing a lot of work on our side in terms of putting in a lot of coastal revetment to protect our shoreline. We did one of the first project that we did in Jamaica around this kind of coastal protection was just after tropical storm Gustav. terms of the work that we did on the Palisades to move it to be able to withstand up to Cat 3 up to Cat 4 in terms of any kind of coastal impact, and with a lot of the new road project we have implemented within those aspects as well. Other coastal revetment project. We have the latest one that is happening, that is coming to a conclusion, is one out in St. Thomas, where that area going into Morant Bay tend to have a lot of coastal flooding whenever time we're impacted by events, and we have put in a major revetment project there. So I think it's a great understanding on our part the kind of impact we have as small island developing state, that our economy and our livelihood is around the coast and outside of the revetment kind of project. I'm sure that the National Environment and Planning Agency has been doing a lot of work as well in terms of coastal zone protection and the kind of work that they have to do, looking at our seagrass bed, looking at our mangroves and all these things that do protect our coastal communities and our coastal infrastructure. So it's not only the hardcore infrastructural work, but also the environmental type protection that has to go in to protect our coastal zones, our coastal infrastructure, and our coastal communities. And a lot of work has been going in on our side, and I'm sure it's similar across SEDIMA participating states in terms of having appreciation for coastal impacts and the kind of coastal protection that we need to do to protect our economies.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Thompson. The second question was shared anonymously, and it says, how are the government and local government initiatives building social capital and leveraging community capital to disaster risk management and response? So to repeat the question, it says, how are the government and local government initiatives building social capital and leveraging community capital to disaster risk management and response? I know. I'm not sure if we have any takers in the room or online.
I'll try.
Okay, Mr. Thompson is taking down the challenge.
I'll try. Who is the person in the
Anonymous attendee.
Well, that probably is a professor.
I agree.
That posted. That sounds like a real thesis question. But in terms of our social capital, I think we, in terms and social. I start with social protection. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security in Jamaica has been doing a lot of work around social protection. They chair the one of the committees of council, which is the welfare, which deals with welfare planning, and so extensive work has been happening in terms of social protection, and it's with an understanding that you have to build that social network in peacetime, so to speak. Nothing is happening, there's no disasters happening, and things are good. You have to build that kind of social protection, especially for those who are at below the poverty line, because what it does, it makes it easier to deal with the response in times of disasters when you have already implemented that kind of social protection network. So your PATH programs and all the other social protection programs are part and parcel in terms of building a resilient community. So that apparatus is in place, and it makes it essential that from that social protection standpoint and the input of the government in the overall social protection standpoint, and not only government as well, but that kind of public-private partnership that we talk to, but not only speaking to it, but ensuring that it is operational and it happens. Ensure that we are on sound footing from that kind of social protection, around that social protection process. And we have been working extensively with other international partners and our international institutions such as World Bank and all these institutions to ensure that as a country we are building out that social protection apparatus. Because if it is not there, I can guarantee you that whenever time there is an impact, it becomes worse for those persons who are classified as poor people. Ministry of Local Government has been doing extensive work as well around ensuring that we build out the kind of protection for our classified poor, indigent housing, building all these homes that our homeless go into on a daily basis, and there's somewhere for them to stay, not only when there's a disaster, but outside of the disaster as well, that there are 3 meals a day being provided for them, and all these things to ensure that you are given to them in times when there is nothing major happening, and so for them to be comfortable to know that if something major should happen, that they can be protected. And we did extensive work as well during the whole COVID response to ensure that our street people, our homeless persons were taken care of. And there was no major report of any major COVID outbreak in any one of those centers because they were managed effectively by the local authorities. The KCMC did extensive work in terms of the homes that persons were going into on a regular basis and sleeping at night. So we have been doing a lot of work on the social protection side. What was the second part of the thesis question? What's the second part of the thesis question? It said something about the community apparatus.
And the second part speaks to leveraging community capital for disaster risk management.
Okay, so the community capital, as I said before, in terms of our process and coming out of those two legislative requirements that lend itself to how our national structure is set up, national, local, and community, and those coming out of our two legislation. The 1993 legislation, I don't know if I had said 86 to begin with, but the 1993 first legislation in 1993 and the 2015 legislation now give proper credence to the community. And so we don't do anything without the community being involved. The parish councils, local authority, does through the parish disaster coordinator, and we have the parish disaster coordinator from the KCMC sitting in the room, extensive work in terms of building community capacity to assist during disasters. So my good friend Mr. Sargent from Bahamas spoke about building resilient shelters, and in Jamaica our shelter management process is dealt with by community persons. So they manage those. The shelter managers are from the communities. They understand what is happening in the community. They open shelters. The zonal committees and the emergency management response communities at the community level are extensively stocked by community personnel. We do training and capacity development constantly every year. There's shelter management training right throughout the year to ensure that we are building that capacity at the local level. And for us in Jamaica, when we speak about aspect of gender in disaster management, and I always say gender issues are not women issues. It's comprehensive. It includes men, women, children, age group, the elderly, everybody. What we find from the gender standpoint is that our volunteers at the community level and persons who are always clamoring for the kind of capacity development at the community level that the ODPEM gives, the local authority gives, the SDC, the MLSS is dominated by women. So it's dominated by women. They come out, they come for the training, they ensure that that they are mothering the community, so to speak, and that's basically how we do it on our side in Jamaica. Those community groups, women are constantly being involved. I remember once we did some training under the Building Disaster Resilient Communities program, and we did a follow-up training, capacity development at the HUDPEM, and a lady came to me and she said, Mr. Richard, well, we are so appreciative of these capacity development training and our ability to help our communities, but every time you're training, we don't use the experience that we have. So I said to her, we would want to keep you trained, but we are happy when you are not using what we give you. Because when you're using it, it means that we would have been impacted, and we don't want that. But what we want to ensure that if we are impacted, that you are able to assist. And so that's what we have been doing in terms of our the kind of social input and the community-based input in disaster management. Don't know if that answered the thesis question, but I tried.
Thank you so much for sharing the response. Going to the other questions. Our government here, not sure where here represents from anonymous attendee, but our government supporting and promoting cost-effective climate risk and disaster insurance programs as part of their resilience strategies. I'm not sure if any of the country representatives can speak to that. Sharing the question again.
I don't know if Bahamas on the
Mr. Thompson is recommending that Bahamas.
I'm not recommending, but I don't
take this question.
I don't ever want to take it. I don't want to dominate the proceedings, so I was saying that they probably could speak to something else.
Yeah, so sharing the question again, our government supporting and promoting cost-effective climate risk and disaster insurance programs as part of their resilience strategies. We would love to hear from our other representatives from the other countries if you are able to speak. And again, if you would like to, you're free to raise your hand and then we can allow you to go.
I'll allow them to intervene
and Mr.
then,
Bean,
and then I'll speak on our...
Your request has been accepted. Mr. Bean has indicated that he'd like to speak. Please go ahead.
Turks and Caicos. While I cannot speak on behalf of the agency that is fully responsible, I can say, however, the Turks and Caicos Islands, we are a part of the Caribbean, the CRIF program in terms of the risk insurance. I'll just turn my camera on, sorry. And it is, of course, supported by the Turks and Caicos Islands government. In fact, in the past, we were a beneficiary of the program, and it's of course fully supported by the TCIG, Turks and Caicos Islands government. And I know quite recently it was being also explored in terms of the coast program here in the islands, especially as it relates to fisher folk and the others living in the islands. So we are truly in support of such initiatives because at the end of the day, as we all know, it does bring resilience to our economies.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I'll add to what Mr. Bean has said in terms of the CRIF and how important it is in terms of insurance. So disaster, what it does, it really transfer the risk from countries to an insurer to do the necessary input after a major disaster, and it is what is classified as a parametric insurance. And I always say to persons that it's not much different from your car insurance. You pay into it every year, but you don't crash every year. but you want to know that if you have an accident, if you have a major accident, you're not paying out of pocket. So you have transferred that risk to the insurance company, and so that's what we have done. So all member states of SEDEMA pay into the CRIF. There is a wind parameter, that's one. There's an earthquake, one for earthquake, which is one of the newest one, and there's also one for flooding in terms of giving you a rainfall intensity. So, and beyond that, what CRIF does as well, it provides scholarship grants and programs for member states around disaster management. So that's how it is terms of the wider government component as it relates to having insurance. What we have been doing as well in Jamaica, trying to advocate for it, is for a lot of these cooperatives and groups to embed it within their operation as well, disaster type insurance. So if you have your agricultural cooperative, those other cooperatives you build into your sector, these kind of insurance. But taking it beyond the aspect of disaster risk transfer, which is insurance, there's also the aspect of disaster risk financing, which goes beyond just insurance itself, is where government has put in place a pool of funding to deal with disasters. What we have done in Jamaica is there is the CRIF and the risk transfer side, and there is the National Disaster Fund. There is a contingency fund. The contingency fund is actually embedded in our constitution. So it gives Parliament the right to determine ever so often what they want the contingency fund to be. So there's a pool of funding there, and then there's a current contingent credit facility, a credit line of that is set up operating through the Ministry of Finance to ensure that the country is on certain economic pillars. So that allows us to pull down on funds if we are impacted. So the overall risk financing mechanism is critical for countries, because it takes the burden off your government when you're combining with all these international partners to have that kind of contingent line of credit to ensure that you can effectively respond to disasters. Also, what it does as well is that at the other tier, it allows for government to have their own pool of funding to deal with disasters that probably has not taken it outside of your economic realm to respond, that allows you to respond. So our National Disaster Fund, which currently stands at about $553 million, allows us to do mitigation intervention and response intervention at the local level. And then you have the contingent credit facility, and you have the other funding streams that allow us to respond to any kind of disaster. So our contingent fund is built within the Constitution, and then there you have a line of credit that is supported through the International Development Bank, and also supported by the World Bank.
Perfect. Thank you for both those responses. Going back to the remaining questions. Okay, so the other speaks to leveraging the capability, competence of communities to respond effectively. How are we leveraging that? Our Red Cross, Lion Clubs, Kiwanis, and other clubs and stakeholders in sustainable ways. So repeating that question, how are we leveraging the capabilities, competencies of the communities to respond effectively? Our Red Cross, Lions Clubs, Rotary, Kiwanis, Optimists, and other service clubs and CSOs and stakeholders in a sustainable way. Do we have any takers?
What kind of answer although it's specific to
the local institutions, yeah. So we know Mr. Thompson alluded to some of this in his previous intervention. So I think he did in fact speak to how the communities can leverage their specific, I would say, what's the word? Their specific strengths and advantages that they possess. So I think this was somehow also answered in the Richard's response. I'm not sure if Mr. Bean, I'm seeing that your microphone is open. Do you have anything to add at this point?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, I know it may be similar in most territories and countries, whereas in the Turks and Caicos, the Red Cross actually has an MOU with government as it relates to disaster management, as well as other, as well as other agencies. But we know quite well the Red Cross, since it's mentioned here. And what has occurred is that we've actually seen somewhat of a paradigm shift, where they have been creative in terms of their outreach. And this creativity has led to, I guess, an increase in terms of their participation, especially from the younger community. So we've seen quite a bit of community engagement and also participation as it relates to, I guess, outreach, response, and the likes, where you're seeing that new fusion of blood, especially from the activities that they're doing. So I know in our situation, it is being leveraged in terms of assisting in the need that we are impacted, and it has been the case in previous storms, Irma, Maria. We would have seen agencies like the Red Cross, like the Rotarians, of course, respond in terms of assistance and also being trained in various aspects. I know that the Ministry of Tourism, for example, has the responsibility for the Environment Assessment and Planning Subcommittee headed by my permanent secretary, who deals primarily with that of carrying out most of the assessments after we've been impacted. And these groups also partake in this activity. You have quite a bit of them who are trained in terms of assisting with rapid assessments and the likes. So for us, they are playing a key role, especially when there's a challenge with manpower.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. I also see where Mr. Franklin McDonald has raised his hand. We will give you the privilege to speak. Please go ahead. Mr. McDonald, are you able to unmute? Sorry.
He's speaking,
Okay, so unfortunately we will have to bypass the question. Do we have somebody else? Do we have any other questions from any of the panelists that are online or any of the participants online? Okay, so I think we have exhausted all our questions and answers. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
He's open. His mic is
Mr. McDonald, are you able to speak?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, I had two quick questions and a quick comment. First, I want to commend the various presenters on the session and, of course, the sponsors of the whole morning session. My questions are, one, what is the role of your diaspora in both resilience building and recovery planning? It wasn't mentioned, but I happen to know in both Bahamas and Jamaica, there's a significant diaspora, and leaving them out of the equation seems to be a mistake we make all across the region. And the second question is, there are lots of valuable lessons to be learned from the neighbors. Some have been alluded to. For instance, with the work done in recently in the Dominican Republic and Belize. And I didn't hear any reference made to how recent lessons learned from the near neighbors, such as those, including, by the way, Cuba and Haiti, and the far neighbors who are members of SEDIMA. As far as I know, there are a lot of lessons from a variety of crises, which are yet to be plowed back into the countries that have not yet experienced them directly. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Okay, so Mr. Thompson will take the first question.
Good afternoon, Sir Mark. It's always a pleasure hearing from you, and I'm happy that you're doing well. So good afternoon to you. In terms of the diaspora, we in Jamaica has ensured that they are a part of the dialogue, and they are a part of the overall contribution process to our resilience building, and there's a diaspora committee that is managed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so there's always that intervention and that involvement in terms of the diaspora. I think we had a meeting sometime early last month in terms of looking at what are the other the wider role of the diaspora in resilience building and how we can leverage what they have to offer to the country. So we have been ensuring that our consulates and missions overseas are involving the diaspora in the overall dialogue and the overall resilience building process. So we have not left them out. We realize that it's an important part of our overall country's landscape and the role that they have to play and the kind of experience that they bring to the table. That is important, and we have to ensure that we constantly involve them in the process. So that is managed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it includes various members of government to include the ODPEM as part of that committee.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone like to respond to the second component or the second aspect of the question?
I could come in quickly to respond to Mr. McDonald's comment on best practices and lessons learned. Definitely a lot of lessons learned and creative solutions to challenges every time we implement a new assessment. And you used the example of the Dominican Republic and Belize, and definitely we document those very carefully as part of our after action reviews to guarantee that we're bringing those lessons and best practices in the next crisis and in the next assessment.
Thank you so much for sharing.
If I may just follow that last comment. My experience, which some in the room may remember, goes back 40 or 50 years in this field, is that documenting is not enough. You need to ensure that the lessons are learned. And I assume sessions like this are meant to bring forward the lessons so that we go beyond documentation and looking at the ways in which we influence how the future plays itself out. So I really would like to hear a little bit more, not just from this UN entity, but the wider UN organization, how it intends to go beyond just climate resilience to resilience, because the two are slightly different. We are building a lot of climate resilient projects and emphasize projects in the region when the threats are not confined to climatic events. So we need to look hard at what is happening in terms of tectonic activity and the lessons learned from Hispaniola over the last 10 years, and to see whether or not they are indeed and in fact being applied in a creative fashion, taking advantage of all the new technologies to the countries that may receive the effects of seismic events, including tsunamis, in the region, which has a rich history of such events. So I'd like to hear more from the UN colleagues about how they are making sure the lessons are not just documented and presented, but in fact turned into practice. Thank you.
I would be able to say that documentation and information management are critical steps to ensure that those lessons learned are available to individuals and groups beyond assessment teams. And of course, a very valid point on the actual implementation of those lessons learned onto the new assessment and the new crisis and the new situation. So I would say that we really take a lot of care and effort into making sure that there is a list of resources and recommendations and best practices that come out of each one of these exercises and assessments in the field, and then make sure that the new team that's going onto the ground and designing, not even implementing yet, but designing an assessment would take all of those into account. Maybe a dedicated session could be useful, and those are resources that we can share from experiences from different countries, but there's definitely a big effort dedicated into knowledge management and making sure that that knowledge that is being generated is captured and is available to other teams beyond those who are there in person and troubleshooting and finding creative solutions to challenges that come up on the spot that are often unique to the context in which we operate. So, great question.
And if I may, one last comment, and to ensure that the private sector becomes a part of the conversation. I do not know how many private sector members are in the room or in the network you have assembled this morning, but it would be interesting to find out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McDonald, for that very thought-provoking two-part question, and also being able to get the interventions not only from persons here representing government, but also the UNDP team. And I think it's also important for us to recognize that this is a conversation in a series of ongoing conversations, and so we hope that we'll be able to create the space to be able to share those lessons and delve a little bit deeper and ensure that, as you mentioned, it doesn't stay as a standalone document, but that it's incorporated into the plans, procedures, strategies as we seek to move forward. So thank you for that intervention. And so in reflecting and listening, I'd like to share what I would consider some of the key takeaways from our speakers today.
May I just intervene one last time? I think Jamaica, fortunately, has an element of the private sector organization of Jamaica, the PBCJ, dedicated, I understand, to looking at resilience for the private sector. And it would be useful to see what they would, how they would react to being approached to join the conversation. I believe Eleanor Jones is the convener of that group at the PBCJ.
Okay, thank you for that as well. So as we seek to delve into the key takeaways, we would have initially at the beginning heard from Mr. Kade on UNDP's interventions and the importance of collaboration as we seek to contribute to and ensure that the fight for improved resilience and improved adaptive capacity is taking a very wholehearted approach. Mr. Lundy from the Bahamas also mentioned the pivotal role of governance, as well as the recognition of the importance of readiness and preparedness as we seek to create space for ensuring disaster response and recovery. In the first panel, we delved a little bit more into the existing government mechanisms, and we heard about the varying disaster risk management acts and policy instruments that were already developed and that were actually being developed to support preparedness and response as we seek to be able to act proactively in the face of disaster. And most importantly, in the second panel, we start to delve a little bit more into the initiatives that were being implemented on the ground. And so we heard about the Abaco Shelter Project, the housing, building, and damage assessments being undertaken, and how that tool has helped to support evidence-based decision-making. We heard about the technical assistance centers or TACs, and as also resilience initiatives being implemented through collaborative efforts. And so all these initiatives individually and collectively have showcased how flexibility plays a critical role in being able to respond in the face of disaster, because in all these initiatives we heard about, having to deal with a disaster and then COVID-19 and its impacts also compounding a lot of what was already happening. And so we recognize as well how critical it is to be able to be flexible, to be able to adapt, and then to see how best we move forward. And most importantly, from this last round of question and answers, the importance for ongoing conversations and ensuring that lessons learned are, ongoing, and that we're engaging all stakeholders in the process, because it's not only for UN organizations or government entities, but as Mr. McDonald mentioned, the need for engaging our CSOs, our private sector organizations, and seeing what role they have to play in the process. And so, from my own assessment, I think what today's event has showcased is that we must recognize the need for meticulous planning for a resilient future, as it is important in being able to protect our lives, our properties, and our livelihoods. When we think about sustainable development, when we think about fostering a society that can adapt to and thrive despite the challenges posed by disasters, we recognize the importance of these conversations and of the initiatives being implemented. And so this sort of proactive approach, through the implementation of these initiatives, not only mitigates risks, but also builds a foundation for long-term resilience and prosperity. And so by investing in resilience today, we are safeguarding our future, and of course empowering communities to be able to face uncertainties with confidence and with strength. And as such, planning involves not only structural improvements and policy frameworks, but also education, community empowerment, innovation, and of course awareness. And so as we close today's event, I would like to extend sincere thanks to the United Nations Development Programme and the team at large for its unwavering commitment to this vital mission around disaster preparedness and recovery. We recognize their leadership and support have been instrumental in advancing shared goals and driving meaningful change in relation to disaster risk reduction. A special thank you as well to all the speakers who have shared their invaluable insights, to the audience both here in Abercorn at the UNDP office in Jamaica, to the JIS team for their capable production of this event. All contributions have been vital to the success of the collective efforts, and they are all greatly appreciated. And of course, in an effort to be inclusive and cater to all our audiences, I'd like to highlight that versions of today's knowledge exchange will be shared with subtitles for our attendees or potential audience members who are not able to hear clearly. And so this will be provided with captions, and this will be shared a week from today's event. And so as we approach the hurricane season, it would be remiss of me to not remind us and to share a few essential tips as we go about our preparations. It's important that we ensure that we create emergency plans, that we're securing our homes and offices to make sure that all vulnerabilities are being addressed, that we of course stay informed, we are aware of evacuation routes, we're protecting our important documents, and most importantly, communicating these plans and ideas with our families, friends, and neighbors, as by sharing these steps, we can seek to ensure safety and resilience through the hurricane season. And so, ladies and gentlemen, partners, allies, friends, on behalf of the UNDP, I extend our heartfelt thanks to everyone for participating today. Your engagements, as was said before, are invaluable, and I'd like to reiterate that we need to be working closely together as we seek to create a more resilient future. My name is Janelle Tomlinson Evans, and it has been an absolute pleasure to be your host today. Together, let us continue to build stronger, safer, and more prepared communities. Thank you, and stay safe.